Hey there folks, it's me, TheTacticalBrit, and a regular question I get asked on a lot of my videos and a lot of the streams is how to improve in Hell Let Loose. Hell Let Loose is, in every facet of the word, a challenging game. It features a super fast time to kill, and the game in general is just ultimately quite tricky. It's a lot more about positioning than people realize, and in this video today I want to explain some basic concepts that will help you improve and how you can actually conquer more in this game, rather than getting owned yourself. A lot of this info I feel will help players who are newer to the game, but also players who have perhaps racked up a couple of hours but are also looking to improve their game. Now just before I dive on in, I do want to shout out that I do stream 5 to 6 times a week, Monday to Saturday at 6:30 PM UK time, and as this video releases on Sunday, Update 7 comes out on Tuesday, and I'll be giving away keys for the game, so feel free to check that out. I'll leave some more links in the description and comment section below. So let's talk about Hell Let Loose. One of the typical problems I think people face in this game is that they often treat it as a conventional shooter, in the sense that people tend to head towards the action as soon as possible, and heading towards the action is not necessarily detrimental to your gameplay, but what I've noticed is that people tend to sort of flurry towards it. It's kind of almost like this, automated movement where people hear gunfire or they see the action, they're like they have to get there as fast as humanly possible, which isn't exactly the best way to play this game. Whether you're on the warfare mode or the offensive/invasion mode, ultimately at the end of the day, this game very much fixates on front lines. The front line of the battlefield is where the majority of the action is going to take place, and it's where the majority of the friction between the two factions takes place. It's where most people tend to die, as almost like a meshing or funneling point. For those of you familiar with more traditional tactical shooters, this is the choke point. This is where everybody goes into the mesh and where everybody gets killed. The best kind of analogy or example I can use for this is to treat the battlefield of Hell Let Loose as you would treat a tank in the game. Now, in all the tanks in Hell Let Loose, the front armor is the strongest. It's the most impenetrable and the most likely to get ricochet damage, where you don't deal the full impact because ultimately the shell just didn't land in anywhere effective. But the sides and the back of the tank are the weakest parts. They are the critical parts, the engine, they are the tracks, they are the things that are going to make the tank mobile and more of a machine. And this exactly applies to Hell Let Loose in the sense that every single objective in the game is much stronger on the front-facing side than it is on the back or sides. Now there are some objectives that are in the corners of maps or like on the edges of maps, so the front-facing section is almost the entire part of the map that is exposed to you, but for the most part I find most objectives in this game have a 360-degree angle of approach. There is almost any possible route you could take in, and with that comes some really good bonuses. Now the best way I can actually symbolize and represent what I'm talking about here is in a visual format. So I've decided to open up Adobe Photoshop of some of the rounds you're seeing in the background here to talk about exactly what I'm going for. Now, we see, for example, we have drowned fields on the offensive here and chapel here on the defensive. And I'm going to talk about both offensive and defensive situations because those are very important. Now, we're going to start here with a defensive situation. The most obvious line of attack for the enemies is straight down this line here. Now, if I just slightly size up my brush here to give you a better impression of what that would look like, this is a dotted trench line and a very easy way in for the enemy team. It's quite simplistic and probably the most likely course of action. Now, you also have to be aware of this little section here, which is the intersection in the road. Why? Because there are some little trench lines, but also there's buildings as well, and people naturally tend to lean towards cover. And the final opportunity is clearly up here. This is an embasement camp, it's got plenty of opportunities to move down into the objective. Yes, it's a little bit more out of the way, but ultimately, in general, I'd say this is a good place to go. So, without this looking a little bit too funky, the ultimate line of attack here is something along the lines of this. People in general are going to have a scope and field of about this much. This is where the enemies are going to come from, and that's what you should be worried about as a player. This entire cross-section is the problem. So what can you do as a defensive player in these situations? Well, that's pretty simplistic. The issue with being defensive is that you have to try and find a way to be active on the point, but also cut off the supply lines of enemies. Naturally, you're looking for things like outposts up here, or, outposts down here, or garrisons that are going to be somewhere hidden amongst these fields. That's a terribly simplistic way of putting it. But ultimately, I find the biggest issue is choosing somewhere where it makes sense to take part in the actual battle. So here is a good opportunity. You have buildings there that face both northwards, southwards, and actually face west as well, so you can cover the majority of this landmass all from this single building. That's a great place and a great opportunity to stem the flow of enemy players. If you're feeling super sneaky and super stealthy, I should add, this is a good opportunity. Somewhere around here, there's a gap in the fence line, there are some bushes in this known area as well, and if you blend into the fence line and don't attract too much attention with gunfire, you can be a real thorn in the enemy team's side. The final opportunities are the flanking routes. So, for example, if you're spawning in and around Chapel, the good opportunity is to go down this way. This way will allow you to get around the back of something like here, or, if you want to head northwards, spawn on Chapel, head up around the back here and into here, and this will allow you to take out any possible spawns in this location. These are some very simplistic ways of how you can deal with defensive objectives, and something I find to be quite effective. Now let's talk about an offensive example, and this is actually quite a tricky one because it's in an urban environment and not exactly in an open field. So if I was to approach this, what would be my thought process? And it's a relatively simplistic approach. Now, if you're defending Hospice, it's quite easy. All you have to do is look in this general direction, which is probably not even 180 degrees worth of field of vision, and you will probably lock down the objective. You can see, look at all of these people heading in droves up in this general direction. It's a terrible idea, and it doesn't work. And the best way I kind of describe this process is, again, the tank analogy. You know, the hardest part of the armor is going to be around about here. This is where all the enemies are going to focus their attention, and it's a terrible idea to approach through there. Now, the second option some people go for is going through the towns. This, again, is just as messy. Now, you have to understand that most likely in most of these situations, preliminary garrisons and spawn points, as actually evidenced, because I do end up destroying these later on in the video, are likely to be around here, here, or around here. These are the easy offset points to allow players to move into the objective if they do get killed on the front line. So again, not exactly the brightest move to head through the town, although there is urban environment cover. Ultimately, at the end of the day, any deployment points you paste down here or anything you do offensively from this location will likely be intercepted. Now, the only difference between a tank and a defensive force, like in Hospice here, is the fact that the defensive force has the ability to react. So yes, the front armor is the hardest part here, but if they detect some trouble down south, well, they'll redirect it. Think of this as almost like a virus analogy. When your body detects some kind of virus, it will send antibodies or whatever the hell it is, white blood cells, to go and deal with that specific problem. And the same thing applies with defensive forces. They hear some gunfire down here, and they're going to send people down here. And that's exactly the problem. Now, in my mind, you're probably wondering why the hell I've spawned all the way down here. And, well, it's pretty simplistic. I don't even want to go anywhere near this entire urban environment, because I know that's going to be a mess. So what's my solution? I came off the garrison. My intent is to go around here, get round to this trench line, sweep through this back sector here, sweep through here, sweep through here, clear out any spawns, deployments, and anything in between, and then look for a central critical point. And typically that tends to be a stronghold building, a building with windows or high grounds, and there are a few of those on Hospice. And that's exactly what I ended up going ahead and doing in this segment of gameplay.
I'm right with you. There's someone coming upstairs, tactical, watch out.
I decided to attack into Hospice through this route, and it's actually relatively visually available on screen to you. And you can see the kind of success that has. Ultimately, the thing about the armor example is that once you hit the engine, or once you take out the tracks, which is the entire back part of this objective, it's completely up for the taking. And the reason I liken this so much to a tank is because the tank is only as good as the back allows. You know, if the engine's destroyed on a tank, the front can't do anything. And when you go through the back of these apartment buildings in this sector here, you find the deployment points, you find the ammunition box, and you find the fuel that keeps the fight going. You take those out, you take out most of the opponents, and that's exactly what I did. I found the garrison and outpost, I found an ammo box, and I found basically everything I could, and then I moved into an apartment building and held off the opponents for as long as possible to allow my team to capture in the critical sector. Not only did this take the pressure off the front line to allow these forces to move forward, but it also allowed me to destroy most of what they had here, making this objective ours for the taking. It's a really simplistic thing, but at the end of the day, Hell Let Loose is a game about rewards, and the reward in this example was, yes, I had to spawn 1, 2, 3, 4 grid squares away, but it was a swift movement across here that allowed me to be an effective infantry fighting force. Do this with a relatively coordinated team or a squad lead who's willing to put down outposts, and you're going to be off to the races with deployment points that will allow you to reassign your goals and continue to attack at a weak part of the objective. Again, the tank example. You know, sure, you can shell the front of the tank 4 times, but it only takes 2 rockets in the back to do the critical damage that you're looking for, and that's exactly what we tried to do in this example. Now, just as a theoretical example as well, I often get asked questions about open fields, and I totally understand that. Open fields are a huge trouble in this game, and it's something that I highly recommend you look into in terms of attacking an open field objective. So let's take this objective for example. Now we know the majority of my dumbass team, the team that will just attack the front line, is going to come from here. They're going to go straight smash grab up the middle. Some of them will probably trail through cemetery because, you know, that's an out of urban the next objective. So we're looking at something along the lines of this. Now, the enemy team are going to be very intelligent, and it's not exactly difficult for them to send their forces to defend this front line or defend a cone of vision that faces in this general direction. Spawn points will likely be somewhere around here, 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 or possibly I would recommend maybe in this little stream here. I would probably put it there if I was them, and that's pretty straightforward. So let's talk about what we would do. Now, this is something that's quite important and something that I feel is important for players to learn. A lot of people think, well, you know, I'm just going to flank, right? You know, I'm over here, I'm in this location, I'm just going to flank. And their version of a flank is doing this. They try to go around, or they try and do like maybe this. And they think that that's probably going to be successful, but ultimately that just isn't the case. If our starting point is over here, I would be doing something along the lines of this. And notice how I'm trying to stick to the lines of the bushes. You can see in cemetery here we have the outgoing of a field, and through the outgoing of the field we have a road, through the road we have the intersection, and then from the intersection we have the ability to push down into other further areas and fields that are located here in the south. Now, you do have to hunk these kinds of things. The dumbest thing I see people do is take a starting point like this, and then just smash and grab through the fields. That's never going to work. The longer you're exposed to the fields, the more likely you are going to die. Most of my gameplay is actually spent hugging bush lines, hugging walls, and making sure that I'm trying to be as little seen as possible. I often don't even shoot when I see enemies because I know that they're end up going to be hearing my gunfire and they're going to be knowing that I'm in that location. And again, we use the analogy of the white blood cell, or just whatever you want to use in that case. You know, once they hear gunfire around here, it's not going to be very difficult for the enemies to send people in that direction, or at least get eyes in that general direction. So I try to disengage as much as formally possible, and I do stuff like crouch running, hugging bush lines, being discreet. I don't open and fire and engage with enemies without knowing the full situation. Like, often I see players who get to this road and then they'll see a bad guy cross and they'll just open fire, but little do they know that 4 other bad guys are about to cross and their rally point's actually somewhere over here, and they just didn't realize that that would be the case. Now, in my humble opinion, if you were to approach this objective, this area here is a write-off. This is open field lands, it's hugged up against the wall of the actual map, they know you're going to come from here. This is also a write-off. You're not going to get any progress here. There is some trenches here, but ultimately, it's open fields, nothing's going to happen for you. Here is also a write-off. I wouldn't attack from this general direction because, again, open fields, nothing to achieve. And I'd say, more or less, most of the attacking area around this point is just a complete and utter mess. I wouldn't go through any of these as an individual player. If I was going to point out the most successful attacking points, it would be this direction and this direction. Or, feasibly, God knows how, if you could get a sneaky flank going around the edge of the map, this direction. Now this is the most obvious one. There is an intersection here with cover, there is the ability to move between hard cover and different various trench lines that will bring you close into the objective, with fields and relatively decent concealment. This is a relatively straightforward example. It's a straight crosser cutter field, and it's not expected, so once you get around the back of the enemies, you'll likely clear out garrisons and other points as well. And this is just a 1 in 100 random flank that happens to work. So really it's the northeast that's the most effective here. Now the reason I say this is because, again, much like the tank example, if we sort of rewind this whole example and where all the bad guys are coming from, the reactive forces are going to be looking in this direction. They're not going to be looking up here. They're not going to be looking up here. And the only thing I would worry about is possible deployments coming from this location, or possible deployments coming from this location. So when you do make that cross over to this intersection, you have to be cautious, take things slowly, and don't rush the affair. And ultimately, that's it. You know, these are my simplistics to flanking. I find in Hell Let Loose, the most successful flanks are the ones that take the longest time. In my earlier example in this, you guys saw me go from all the way from here, up here, all the way into here, and then I cleared out an entire objective and all the spawns effectively by myself. You know, sure, I did have some squad members in the long run, but most of this was done by me. I took out the spawns, I took out the ammo boxes, I got into the hard building here, and I managed to take the difference in terms of releasing the pressure of this group as they moved forward. And because of that, we actually got relatively close to capturing Hospice. Now, we didn't in the end, and unfortunately I can't do anything about that as an individual player, but I did my job. I got into a hard-to-reach location, I held them off for as long as humanly possible in the critical sector, which is the circle, and for the most part, I made it much easier for these guys to advance off of the point. Now, whether or not the other team actually does that, or, you know, whether or not your teammates are actually bothered to push off or try to push forward, at the end of the day, you've done your job by making that effort and making that approach. So folks, that's about it from my notes on Hell Let Loose and basic flanking and how to get into the game. Again, really heed my warning here, you know, try to be as low profile as possible, don't engage, crouch run, keep to cover, move to concealment, and then you can really try and use these long flanking routes around the back of objectives to be as an impactful player as humanly possible. In most of the examples I listed here, like in Hospice and on the defensive example, I was a thorn in these people's sides, and they were really upset to be dealing with me in most of these scenarios. As always, folks, I hope you had a good day, have a good weekend, and I'll look forward to seeing more content with you guys on Update 7. Feel free to leave a like, a subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.